For more on this, we're now joined by Kamal Ramburuth, who is a debt and development finance researcher at the Institute for Economic Justice. And he joins us via our video link. Kamal, thank you so much for joining us here on SABC News this evening. Let's start off with your comments when it comes to that midterm budget. We heard from the finance minister, a number of people and economists saying really there was not enough wiggle room for the minister. What is your institution saying?
Hi, Mbali. It's great to be here with you and your viewers. Yes, I mean, the IJ has a number of concerns with the budget. Firstly, I think we're quite relieved that the Treasury was unable to push through the extent of budget cuts that they had aimed to initially. These kind of budget cuts are a step back from what was threatened in the months leading up to the MTBPS. But that doesn't take away from the fact that these budget cuts are cuts to the poor and marginalized. So over the next 3 years, the Treasury has planned cuts to health, to education, and a deterioration of the real spending on the special relief of distress grants, right? So these cuts mean that spending per enrolled learner, for example, in our schools, in real terms, will go from about 25,000 Rand a year to about 23,000 Rand a year from now. These budget cuts mean that each public healthcare recipient that was receiving about 5,300 Rand per person in 2020 will receive only 4,500 Rand in 2026 if the MTBPS projections go ahead as planned. And this is in the context of an already struggling healthcare and education systems. There's still huge cause for concern with this budget.
Yeah. And of course, a number of people have raised their concerns when it comes to this fiscal crisis that we find ourselves in. And of course, looking at the statement that you, as the Institute for Economic Justice, released, and you said that the minister basically shied away from even using the term and phrase fiscal crisis. Why do you think that, the minister left that out? Do you think he doesn't want to cause too much panic in the country?
Mali, I think it's because there is not a immediate fiscal crisis, and I think that's why he had not said it. What had happened previous to the budget was a huge campaign by business media and by National Treasury to push through a narrative that we have an imminent fiscal and debt crisis. Right? This is simply not true. And the budget shows that. The budget shows that the gap between revenue and expenditure is within historical norms. It's not much different to what it was in, for example, 2019, 2018, 2017 on average. And if this year we're in a fiscal crisis, then we would have been in a fiscal crisis then too. What this does speak to is firstly the fact that the trajectory that South Africa is going along is concerning. While we're not in an immediate fiscal and debt crisis, as business media and as National Treasury had been pushing the public to believe, we're not in a great place as the country, right? And part of the problem with this isn't necessarily just our debt. It's our entire economy and the growth of our entire economy, right? And I think what's concerning about this budget is that this wasn't a growth budget, right? This budget was making huge budget cuts, but it didn't really forward huge plans or the disbursement of funds into areas of the economy that would grow it, right? Yeah. So it's definitely not a growth budget. Yeah. And I think the Minister of Finance must take responsibility for South Africa's growth. The Minister of Finance must take responsibility for South Africa's development on these fronts.
And I was coming directly there. When it comes to this budget, and you are saying that there's no growth, what does it mean then for South Africans if you are saying that we have a budget here that does not show economic growth, which is quite dire and much needed in our country, especially if we are trying to create jobs?
Sure, it's an excellent point, Mali. So let's break this down a bit. I mean, this MTBPS doesn't seem to offer a growth financing, and it's not doing that from an industrialization perspective. It's not doing that from a human development perspective, and it's not doing that from a debt perspective. And what do I mean by these three things? Firstly, from an industrialization perspective, what the budget that the Minister of Finance presented yesterday does do is he says that we're going to increase in the medium term our spending on infrastructure, which we of course encourage as the IEJ, and this is going to be an infrastructure increase of about 7 billion rand. Right? So there's going to be a 7 billion rand increase in infrastructure, but economic development in all of the other parts of economic development are going to decrease by 9 billion rand in the next year. And what does that mean? So in the medium term, it means that this budget aims to decrease spending on job creation over the medium term by 1%. It's going to decrease spending on industrialization and trade in the medium term by 13%. This budget is going to decrease expenditure on agriculture and rural development by 11%. And finally, this budget aims to decrease innovation, science, technology spending by 20%. So yes, while they're spending a little bit more on infrastructure, all of these other things that make up economic development are being cut away by this budget in the medium term. So that's what I mean by not from industrialization perspective. But what do I mean by not by human development perspective? Well, when you look at human development, you're looking at how well are we educating and how well are we keeping our people healthy and fit and well educated. And this budget, what it does is it's decreasing health expenditure on basic education. It's decreasing expenditure on health. So by health, there's going to be a 10 billion rand decrease next year. And in basic education, there's going to be a 2 billion rand decrease next year. So it's difficult for the minister and the government to stand up and say we're serious about development when they're decreasing spending on all of these things that make up the basis for a developing economy.
So what should the minister do if, we are being told that he finds himself in a rock and a hard place when it comes to trying to see, a much needed economic growth in the country? What should he be focusing on so that, service delivery is still prioritized?
Sure. And I think it's quite difficult sometimes to budget away the problems of service delivery, right? It's difficult to budget away corruption that we're seeing in our economy. You have to see it, you can't ignore it. But it's difficult for a budget to take those things away. Those are process things that the financing from a budget is supposed to support, right? That's a broader question around the governance of our government, and that it's a very important conversation that needs to happen. What the minister should do, I've already mentioned the fact that it's very important to invest in industrialization, in human development. But ultimately, I think, Mbali, your question is a question that South Africans need to answer in the election year next year. We need to answer this question when we vote. And when we vote, we need to vote for political parties that offer us social security, that offer us healthcare, that offer us education, that offer us the ability to realize the fulfillment of ourselves through service delivery. That's what we should be voting for, and it's within a kind of an economic paradigm that needs to encourage growth in addition and as part of these things. So these are the kind of things that we need to be looking towards as South Africans when we choose our next finance minister, when we choose our next political party next year.
All right, Kamal, thank you so much for your time. A message there from Kamal Ramburuth saying that prioritize how you vote next year. Of course, making reference to that midterm budget we saw from the finance minister delivering it yesterday in Parliament. Of course, Kamal Ramburuth, who is a debt and development finance researcher from the Institute for Economic Justice.